Looks like we're good.
Yep.
I didn't really notice how long it took us to get through the Sermon on the Mount. Did you count them or anything?
How many's it been? Like, I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna say 11.
I don't know. I haven't looked.
Oh, I thought you were about to say.
No, I actually just now forgot to put what number this was. I'll have to go back and edit that. So, I'm not sure.
Yeah, some of these I'm sure are gonna take a lot longer than I would at first imagine.
Mm-hmm. All right. Looks like there's a few people here. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for being with us, and for those of you that try to be with us often as you can. It means a lot to us. But we were talking about last time when we finished up just how much we enjoy doing this together. It's good for Ben and I to be together and to be in the Word. He's a good friend of mine and a good brother, and he always makes me better. So it's been good for me, and I hope it's been helpful to some of you. We're going to finish up the Sermon on the Mount today in Matthew chapter 7. We're going to look at verses 24 through the end of the chapter. But we're going to take some time also to just remind ourselves of some things that we talked about and some things Jesus taught in this sermon, and sort of tie them into this last thing that Jesus does here. So I think we'll save maybe some of the overview stuff for that discussion, if that's cool with you. You have anything you want to say before I get going?
No. Sounds great.
All right, Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house. And yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes.
I think it's one of the best little parables Jesus ever told. I love it because it's so vivid. Like, it's easy to see the picture of the two guys building their houses. One guy just strolling down to the beach and just throwing up a house and having parties and people hanging out and all that stuff, and seeing the other guy trudge up, I don't know, maybe into the mountain and digging deep and spending days and weeks building his house and all this stuff. And then of course the storms. It's just really vivid to picture the whole thing. But it's also such a simple, clear lesson Jesus is teaching that is so profound, and it stretches through every aspect of your life. And when you really start thinking about the principle that he teaches here, or the instruction that he gives here, it's really there's a lot of depth to it, even though, like a lot of the teaching of Jesus at its surface, is pretty direct and simple to get. But then to go live it out is where you find all the complexity and the beauty and the challenge and the struggle in the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I could summarize this just in a totally different way, what Jesus seems to be saying at the end of this sermon is saying amen is not enough. Like, we can read through all these great teachings and be like, yeah, that's right. I shouldn't worry about my life. And yeah, I should turn the other cheek, and I should love my enemies, and all of that, like every challenging thing, and be like, that's right. But the key thing that Jesus says here is there's no blessing in having heard these things. There's no blessing in it. The blessing's in the doing of it. And if you do it, then there's promises attached, and there's safety, and there's security. But just because you agree with it doesn't mean anything. Just because you've heard it doesn't mean anything.
Yep. We've made this comparison a few times. We've gone through the Sermon on the Mount, but Jesus is probably brother, James, whether it was Jesus' brother or not, James would say it this way: don't just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word. And that's what it is.
And this one will be blessed in what he does, he
Yep.
said. I mean, how many times have you had somebody come out after you've preached something or taught something and been like, oh man, that was so good. And what a blessing it was to hear that and to be here. And, sometimes that feels really good, but that's been said to me countless times by people I know. Don't go and practice the things that we've talked about. Like, they sort of come to church to get their fix and they feel good about having heard those things and participated in it. And you just froze. So I don't know if that's you or if that's me.
Well, you're
I'm
frozen
going
too.
to wait for a second to see if you come back. Because on
So
my
I'm looking
screen,
at
it looks sort
my
of
on my
zombie-ish.
iPad. I'm
No.
still talking and moving, and you're
Okay,
frozen
okay.
in a really epic way, though. You're like this right here
Okay.
on the thing. But I think it's back now. You're moving now, so I think you're okay.
Okay. You were frozen too, so I wasn't sure who was what.
Yeah.
All right,
I think we're good.
Did you hear what I was saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, I don't know that we as preachers should do this, but it'd be interesting if, like, on Judgment, not interesting, it'll actually be really sad if on Judgment Day, one thing God does is to say, hey, you remember all those sermons that you sat in church and you went up and told the preacher how much you appreciated it? Maybe even told yourself in the car ride home, man, that was really encouraging. It meant a lot to me. But you never did anything about it.
Right.
That's why I'm saying I never knew you. Depart from me, because you never did anything. And by the way, that's why all these messes happened in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a really profound, and Jesus, I think, elevates that idea, like, hey, you need to do something about this in both directions. With the one man who builds his house, which I kind of take it as almost being symbolic of building up your life. Everybody builds their life one way or the other, and some people just hear the words of Jesus and they go about building their life without ever obeying Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Then what's going to happen is you're going to get hit with some hardships. You're going to get hit with some trials. You're going to get hit with some tests in your life. And if you're not building your life on Jesus and on the words of Jesus by doing what he says, you're going to be devastated. It's all going to crumble and fall apart. It may be a party for a long time. You're going to enjoy it because you just popped a house up real quick on the sand and you're going to go about your business doing whatever you want. But once things start really happening, once life really hits you, you're going to be destroyed, either in this life or in the life to come, or in both, if you don't obey my word. Yeah. On the other hand, if you're willing to take the patient, diligent, hard task of hearing my words and actually doing them, then when the storms come in your life, whenever difficulties come, when temptations come, whenever you have huge losses, whatever it may be, you're going to endure, both in this life and even more so in the life to come. You're going to be able to make it because you did the things that I said. He just, the picture that he gives in this little parable just shows how vital it is and how consequential it is in every respect to be obedient to the words of Jesus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This whole thing about, like, because Jesus specifies in this text that both of them heard the teaching of Jesus. And again, what a blessing that would have been, that we would have gotten a chance to hear Jesus. And Charity kind of points this out in her comment just now, like the only difference between these two guys is the foundation, or that one puts it into practice. Yep. It's not like one's a lazy guy,
right?
I mean, he still builds a house, he still does the thing, and he probably thought he was building something really good and secure, like in his ideas. But again, this always comes down to just simply being obedient to what God says. And I guess I already said this one way, but I want to say it again, because I hear this so often from Christians, and I think I've fallen into this trap a little bit. Do you remember in Ezekiel 33, like around verse 30, God tells Ezekiel how everybody thinks about his preaching? Yeah. And he's like, hey, Ezekiel, I need you to know, like, everybody talks about you. They love your preaching. They invite their friends to come hear it. You sound like to them like a fine-tuned instrument, but the problem is none of them do anything that you say, but they do come and listen and they all talk about it and it's great. How many times have you heard people talk about, like, hey, who's your preacher? Oh, you know who my preacher is? Or, hey, what are you reading right now? Oh, I'm reading like so and so, and I'm reading this and I'm reading that. And I got to be honest, like the Christians that I know who like just are lights and do it right, they just never talk like that.
Yeah.
They just don't. Like they're not so enamored with people or where they get their information. Like when they hear something true, they just practice it and do it. Um, and I think we just need to be careful about falling into those kind of traps, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of times, one version of that trap is you get really excited about somebody, maybe because they're saying some true stuff and some good stuff, but then it just becomes about that person, and you start building your life on whatever they're saying, and they start throwing a bunch of stuff that's kind of true, but kind of really not. I mean, in some ways, that's what this whole sermon, a lot of the sermon has been about. So much of the sermon has been about, hey, I'm telling you, your righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. Hey,
Right.
don't be like the hypocrites who do X, Y, Z. Hey, so many of the things has been about that. And one thing you should say if you think this is dumb, but I've thought some about like the sand and rock difference in metaphor.
Okay.
But like, if I understand correctly, sand is just rock, like tiny, tiny,
Lots of little
tiny,
ones, yeah.
little tiny rocks. So sometimes we build our lives on sand because it actually, like, we look at particular grains of it, and it's like that looks like the right stuff, but it's not really rock. It's just a few things that are right. What Jesus is saying is, you need to listen to me. Like the scribes and Pharisees actually got some stuff right, not most, not maybe even most things. Certainly their character wasn't, but and the same can be true with like either sometimes a preacher who's trying to do his best, he's still not going to get everything right, either in his character, his teaching. And then of course there's teachers that are doing things that are overtly and purposely wrong. Whatever it is, Jesus is saying, you need to listen to me and be concentrated on me and what I'm saying and what I'm thinking. Don't build your life on these things that are like kind of little tiny rock parts of the rock maybe, or whatever, but they're not really the rock. They're not really the real thing you need to build your life on. Like I said, I may be running too far with that metaphor, but I wondered if that's part of why Jesus did that, was to say like, hey, this is like imitation and unstable stuff. It's similar to the real substance that you can build your life on, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good thought. I mean, doesn't everybody do the things that they do in their life because they've collected pieces of advice or pieces of information or, kind of their smorgasbord of like this philosophy, I think everybody does that. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a great illustration of that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And Melanie
Um,
just made a good point here that, I mean, we kind of touched on, but I do think it's the one interesting here. These two guys, one thing they're both doing is they're both building. And the other thing is they both go through a storm. Everybody, nobody's exempt. Jesus doesn't say, hey, if you do my words, then you're not going to worry about anything bad ever happening or it ever being hard or ever being challenging. The difference is the end result. I think you said this last time, that wisdom is seeing the end of a thing and then behaving accordingly. This is a great parable that illustrates that. You got to think ahead to the end because you're going to go through the hard stuff and you're going to build something. But what are you building on? And what you build on, whether it's Jesus or other things, whether you do the words of Jesus or not, is going to dictate what happens after those storms, after those difficulties.
yeah, good. Okay, so here's a challenge. I'm going to ask you this question because I've had this asked to me before by people who are biblically skeptical or not Christian or whatever. When they look at this passage and they're like, okay, so it seems like Jesus is saying the only people that are going to be able to weather the storms of life are people who have Jesus teaching. But I know lots of people who've been through awful, terrible, hard things, and their house hasn't fallen apart. Their life still is okay. Like philosophically, they've navigated their way through it with their, Eastern religion or their, sort of self-help books or counseling in this life, you know. So I don't know that Jesus is really right here, that the only way to keep your house from falling down in the storms of life is to build on his teaching. What would you say to that?
It seems to me that's what the rest of the Gospels highlight, that a lot of people thought that about Jesus. Like that was their thing. How dare you? Like, who gave you the authority to say that you're the one? So I don't think we're alone if we ask that question.
Sure.
To me, I don't think Jesus really fully answers that question until his resurrection from the dead. And to me, that's what's different. Like, yeah, actually, I think there are people who are agnostics, they're, Taoists, they're, whatever,
Mhm.
um, practitioners of Islam, whatever, and they're going to be able to deal with a lot of stuff just as well, maybe in a way, maybe not, but it may, at least there's an appearance that it's dealt with just as well as someone who's a Christian. I don't know that's totally true, but I could like buy that as a possibility. But what I know for a fact is the main difference in Christianity and every other world religion, and whether or not you do the words of Jesus or not, is going to be on Judgment Day in the resurrection. And that's the real, I think that's the final answer. I mean, I'm personally persuaded that actually, like a lot of times, those things, like, okay, you're saying that, but give it some more time and let's see how,
Right.
when you give enough time, like, yeah, in the past 5 years, this Christian has dealt with the coronavirus, the fallout from the coronavirus, the same way as this person who's an atheist. But give it more time. Look at their relationships. Look at their like honesty about their happiness. All these things that's going to get impacted. And I'm really persuaded that the person who builds their life on Jesus is going to do better. But even if someone wants to quibble with that, I think that's where the resurrection of Jesus and what happens after death is the main thing that Jesus is talking about here.
Yeah, very good. My answer too is I think sometimes when we think of rains and floods and storms, we immediately think trials. But biblically, if you try to think in the Old Testament, when did rain, storms, and floods come? And it wasn't just a trial, it was a judgment.
Yeah.
Like that's judgment imagery more than it is just trial imagery. So I think part of what the ultimate thing Jesus is saying is when God finally tests your structure that you've built through your life in the judgment, only one's going to stand. And the only one that's going to stand is the one who built his life on the teaching of Jesus. So
That's a great point. And that really matches up. If we're right, we've kind of grouped like verses 13 to the end as kind of this like wrap up section for Jesus, even.
mhm,
Every one of those was about your judge. Like when you reach the end of your path, is it destruction or is it life?
right,
Are you going to be devoured or are you going to be bearing good fruit?
right.
Are you going to, is Jesus going to say, enter in, or is he going to say, I never knew you? Like all these are end of the line judgment kinds of statements.
Yeah. And I think I'd also say, I think some Christians can get discouraged sometimes when they do have trials in their life. And those trials literally turn them upside down. Like it feels like your house has fallen apart, you know. Go read the psalmists, you know, sometime in times where David or others were crying out in total despair. They don't sound emotionally healthy. They don't sound like they're conquering the moment. You know what I mean? They're crying out to God for help.
Yeah. And
But I think
sometimes they barely sound like they're believing when they cry out. I mean, they are, but they
yeah,
barely sound like it. Yeah.
yeah. Or you even have Paul in the New Testament, you know, writing things like we despaired even of life, you know, in 2 Corinthians 1. Is it wrong for Christians to go through times where they have their own Garden of Gethsemane and they're so stressed out that, you know, their sweat becomes great drops of blood? Like we need to remember Jesus in what he went through actually had like physiological manifestations of stress and difficulty. And if we have those in our life, it's not necessarily a failure of faith, you know. Um, and so I just don't want anybody to walk away from this text thinking that he's simply saying, "Oh, you're going to fly through every trial of your life with, you know, with no problems at all." Like that's not what he's getting at here.
And Jesus, I mean, kind of himself embodied that. The scribes and Pharisees who built their house, the temple, it was going to fall apart. Judgment was going to come upon them, and their house, great was going to be the fall of that house. Meanwhile, Jesus said, destroy this temple and it'll be raised up. I know that's a little off the metaphor here because the house doesn't get destroyed, but because Jesus was loyal to the Father and did all the things that the Father wanted him to do, his judgment was that he was the righteous one. He was the Son of God, and he was raised up from that. And that's what we can have real confidence in.
Yeah. So I'm thinking maybe with the rest of our minutes here, how do we take what this sermon has taught, what Jesus has taught in this sermon, and then remind us of what we're talking about here? So he who hears these words of mine and practices them and does them, then the storms of life or the judgment that's coming will not affect me the same way that it affects somebody else. Like, what are some of the teachings that stand out to you that it's easy to see the correlation between practicing it and then when the storm comes or when the judgment comes, there's a correlation.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll
I'm thinking,
start if you want to think about it for a
yeah,
minute.
go ahead. Go ahead. I think I'm tracking with the setup you got here, but yeah, go ahead to kick one
So
off.
I'm just, when Jesus said back in chapter 5 or 6, when he was doing the prayer, the model prayer, and one of the things we were to pray was to forgive us our debts as we've forgiven those who are indebted to us. And then afterwards, Jesus says, if you forgive others, God will forgive you. But excuse me, but if you don't, he won't. I mean, that's a direct correlation.
Yeah.
You heard this idea that you have to be forgiving, you have to reconcile, you have to let things go when other people wrong you. And if you don't practice that teaching, then when the judgment comes, like everything is going to fall apart because God won't forgive you.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a pretty direct one that he's even said right there. Like what you do in this life is part of what's going to happen in your judgment. So
Yeah. Probably the one just because I just feel a need to guard myself personally so much, and I just see it so much in the lives of friends of mine and people I'm close to and stuff. But a couple that stand out to me are back from chapter 5, where he talks about like reconciliation or dealing with your anger
mhm.
um, towards somebody. He has that bit where he says, "Hey, if you don't deal with it, then you're gonna be," he used the metaphor like you're getting thrown into jail, which maybe not even metaphorically, like you get, but you're gonna face judgment if you don't figure out how to deal with relational conflict and anger and hate in your heart and stuff like that. And then obviously the stuff about lust. I mean, he talks about it'd be better to, if it would help, it would be better to start chopping off body parts
Mm.
rather than go to hell. And that's what I mean. In essence, he's saying like that's how big of a deal this really is. So there's a lot of like I don't know what the right word is exactly. It's not just emotional, but I guess that's the only word that's coming to my mind right now. But emotional temptations, lust, anger, hate, jealousy, those kinds of things that Jesus taps into and says, you better figure out that stuff, or else when the storm of judgment comes, you're going to be faced with some real dire consequences.
Yeah, very good. Another one that I think is like that is the idea of generosity,
Yeah.
and specifically generosity towards people who don't treat you right. When he says, do good to those that hate you, pray for those who, use you and spitefully, use you and persecute you. When he talks about giving to him who asks of you, expecting nothing in return, the golden rule in chapter 7, do unto others as you have them do unto you. How many times is Jesus going to teach in other places where part of what we do in this life is by our generosity and sharing of our goods or our goodwill, we're going to essentially secure some things for ourselves in the judgment. We'll have people to testify almost for us on our behalf that we were those kind of people. In the book of Luke, Jesus tells that parable of the savvy servant who takes, like, he's going to get fired and he uses his master's goods to sort of win friends. And Jesus is like, yeah, hey, make friends of yourself with unrighteous mammon. That's savvy.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what he's teaching there. Or in Matthew 25, I think we're going to talk about that later on if we actually do all the sermons in Matthew, where Jesus says, you saw me naked and you clothed me, and thirsty and you gave me something to drink, and you visited me when I was in prison. And everybody's like, well, when did we do that? So again, practicing the things that Jesus taught and having them correspond to the judgment of our life is really important.
I mean, it's maybe a little bit tangential of the generosity thing, but one where he explicitly says that and uses the word judgment is in chapter 7, where he talks about don't judge others hypocritically, because the same standard you use, you're going to be judged. So we need to have a generous spirit in our judgments of one another, our perception of one another, our treatment of one another, otherwise knowing that we're going to be judged similarly.
Another thing just to remind ourselves of is the way that Jesus began this sermon was with all the blessed statements.
Right.
Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Kingdom life is supposed to be like that. And it doesn't mean that life's going to be easy, because some of that is about persecution And some of that is about showing mercy, which is incredibly painful to show mercy to people who've hurt you. Um, Working on purity of heart is difficult. Mourning over the right things in your life is difficult. But going back to the putting the end with the beginning in this sermon,
Mm-hmm.
part of the way we make it through the storms of life, if those are indeed trials, is by constantly remembering and counting ourselves as blessed people.
Yeah.
Because the Lord's in our life and because we're going through these things with him. If I didn't have that through the storms of my life, I'm not sure what I would do. I've thought about this from the question I asked earlier. People that do make it through this sort of the storms of their life, generally, they do have some people to point to that have been very solid for them. And I think the difference becomes when those people and those props come out from under them. Where did my community go? Where did my family go? Now I have to sort of do this all on my own, and I don't have those strong things around me to prop me up. Are you still blessed? Like, are we blessed if it's just us and God?
Yeah.
Are we,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I was thinking too about the Beatitudes at the beginning. They're actually a great way to summarize the kind of house that we're building whenever we do the good deeds that Jesus has told us to do, keep the commandments Jesus has taught. Meaning, with each one of those Beatitudes, he says, hey, here's the kind of things you're going to need to do. And he goes through all these practical ways you're going to build meekness and purity of heart and all that stuff, hungry and thirst for righteousness. But each one of those had a promise. You're going to be going through it and you're going to look maybe a little foolish because while the other guy's house is done, you're still digging down into a foundation, to use the illustration from the end of the sermon. But in the end, your house is going to stand. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. You shall inherit the earth. You will be comforted. You'll be satisfied. You will be. I mean, all those great promises, you will see God. You'll be sons of God. That's the great hope that we have in doing what Jesus has said. And I also love that right after that, not only is it for us, but right after the Beatitudes, he said, hey, if you guys will do these things that I've told you, yeah, you're getting persecuted, but also you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. Mm-hmm. The house you're building is one that will stand. And it's not just going to be a place of refuge for you, but it may be a place where others are able to find shelter and refuge and help and aid. And they'll see the light of God through the life that you've been living. And they'll be able to dig deep right next to you and build a house that's built on the rock. And more people won't face destruction in the end, to where their life, the thing on their tombstone is great was its fall, but rather they were able to endure, they were able to stand. And so I have this great hope, even going through the hardships, definitely hardships of following after Jesus, as he said in the sermon. I have all these promises, but also I'll be able to extend those out to others. And that's powerful stuff. And that's motivation to keep on doing it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I like that a lot. I think we're close to time here.
Yeah.
Verses 28 and 29 here, when, and I think Charity made a comment about this as well. By the way, lots of really great comments today. I appreciate that. Thanks everybody for participating like that. These sermons in the book of Matthew, since we're going to continue to talk about this, what Matthew seems to keep highlighting in these sermons is mostly what we should learn about Jesus here. Yeah, this sermon's great for us to learn about how we should live, but what do we learn about Jesus? The fact is he's the authority, like he's the king. There is nobody, no teacher, no philosopher, no politician, no powerful individual that's ever been that is worth our time, really, when it comes to building our life. And that's what these people were beginning to see. By the way he spoke, there was something so different about him. I wonder sometimes if we as Christians become so comfortable with Jesus that we forget like how in awe of him we need to be.
Right.
Like how highly we need to esteem his authority. He's not just a friend of ours. He's not just sort of like oh yeah, I get some good stuff from him. Like he's our sovereign. So
Yeah. And therefore we should be in awe and do
mhm.
what he says. And I think that's like one, we do what he says because boy, I don't want to be on his bad side. He has such authority and power and greatness and grandeur. But also I really, really, really want his power to work in my life because I'm pretty powerless. But if
Yeah.
he has all this authority and power, then if I'll just do what he says, then there's a guarantee that that power will imbue me with something special and life changing. And so let me just roll with him.
Yeah. Amen. Very good. Well, thanks everybody for being with us today. I guess next week, if you're good, we'll start.
Yep.
Is that Matthew 10 is the next one?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. Starting Matthew 10 with the next sermon of Jesus in Matthew. So
It'll be fun. Thanks again for the comments. As always, guys, it's really cool. It's fun to go back and read them. I'm sorry we don't get to keep up with them as much during the thing, but really encouraging.